the Bantaba digital platform. What is it, like what need in the market is it meant to address, and how then does it also do this?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bantaba, it's a digital platform that connects startups in Africa with talent and capital available in the African diaspora. And how we do this is that we have this platform where startups can create a profile, and in that process, they can pick their ventures. So they can discuss the problem they are solving, the solution they have for it. But more importantly, also, we ask them about their needs in the terms of talent. Do they need mentors? Do they need advisors? Or do they need consultants with specific background and skills? And then on the other hand, we also have the diaspora who can create a profile on the platform. And when they do, we take information about their job, work experience, their educational background, to understand their competencies, but also we ask them about their interests to engage with startups in Africa. And then what we do, we essentially use this information to match startups with the right people and the right talent in the diaspora community. So as a startup in Kenya, if you are looking for someone with a data science skill, when you log onto Bantaba, you will be able to see people in the diaspora who have these skills, but who are also willing to engage with startups, so who are essentially willing to support you as a startup.
Now, Lamin, even with that background, but just for purposes of clarity and maybe for us to get a proper understanding, why do you feel like this platform is very relevant right now? How bad or how severe would you say the problem of, startups, small businesses, getting access to investor funding, how bad is the problem, would you say, currently? And we could also talk about the context of the African continent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as entrepreneurs in Africa struggles too much to access talent, but also funding. For example, if you look at VC funding in 2020, a total of $300 billion was spent in VC funding in 2020. And only about 1.5 billion of this went to Africa, less than 1%, right? And this is despite the fact that according to the African Development Bank, 22% of working age population in the continent are starting new businesses. Right. And this is the highest rate in the world, right? So if you looked at this stat, it's quite heartbreaking. There are a lot of young people, a lot of driven entrepreneurs who are trying to address different problems, but lack that support in order to access talent and capital to grow their businesses. And this is essentially the reason of our existence. The goal here is to mobilize the diaspora's resources for the women and men addressing the various challenges on the continent.
Now, Lamin, even just to dwell a little bit on those damning figures where you talked about the fact, the funds are out there, but then when it comes to absorption or even the portion that comes to African startups, it's literally just a drop in the ocean. I know you've touched a little bit on it, but if I was to query, would you say it's a situation where it's priorities? Would you say it's a situation where maybe African startups are just not ready to take in this money? Why do you feel like there's such a disconnect? And as Bantaba, how then do you fit into that reality?
Yeah, actually, I don't think it's because African startups are not ready to take this fund. I think the problem lies with the source of these funds, right? Most of the global capital in terms of VC and private equity funding, it's controlled by people who are living outside of the continent, right? Most of these investors are either based in the US or Europe mostly, and have a very, very little understanding about the continent, right? And this is the result. As a result, this is why African startups find it very, very hard to access talent, right? Because on top of the mind of every investor is understanding of the market that you are investing in, right? And as long as that's missing, then it's a very big hindrance to investing in that specific market. And this is why we are targeting the diaspora, because they already know the market. They are from these communities, right? But most importantly, these startups are solving problems that send people like ourselves, many people in the diaspora, out of the continent in the first place, right? Whether it's access to decent education, or it's access to clean drinking water, or it's access to financial services. So I think this is why we focus on the diaspora, because they have an understanding of the market. But more importantly, they also understand the problem that these startups are solving.
Perfect. But then in the same vein, we also see a situation, and depending on, what report you read or, where you're looking across the continent, and even if we're to speak specifically about Kenya, when it comes to accessing investor funds, we've seen a situation where even when you look at startups, small businesses, just the way entrepreneurs operate, the big percentage is highly informal, right? So there's a certain argument whereby, okay, there are also these funds that maybe we can use to help African startups, but then African startups are not investor ready. Just help us understand what your thoughts are on that, and maybe how can startups then also fully prepare themselves so that when opportunities like this, like when Bantaba shows up and, you know, there's a clear-cut link between you're the startup, here's the investor, let's make it happen. How then, when opportunities arise, they're ready to just tap into them without any problems?
Yeah, that's a very important question, because investor readiness is a very important prerequirement for having access to investors or investment in the first place. And I think this is where the knowledge transfer part of the platform comes into play, right? Because we have two core value propositions for the startup: helping them to access knowledge that's out there, and in addition to that, helping them to access the capital that's out there, right? And it takes a lot of preparation in order for a company to be investor ready, right? And the good thing is we have people in the diaspora that have this skill. Myself, I have a very strong background in finance, and in my own personal capacity, I've worked with startups in Ghana, for example, to help them look at their pitch deck, look at their business plans and business models, right? Because these are all the things that startups need to think about in order to get investor ready, right? And what we intend to do on the platform is to link them with people that have these skills to help them clearly define the problems they are solving, the solutions to those problems, and why those solutions are the best solutions for those problems. And with this process, what this process does is that it makes them investor ready and makes their companies investable. And that's an important role that Bantaba is going to play for those startups.
Great. And now I'd actually really like to narrow the conversation down fully to Bantaba. Now, I know you touched on it when you were, you know, just leading us into what the app does. But when it comes to eligibility, when it comes to people tapping into this, when it comes to exactly what you're looking for, because when we look at startups, and also if we are to look at the current COVID-19 realities, a lot has been affected in terms of, you know, people are moving from some industries to other industries. Some industries are being given, you know, more priority because they seem to be working more. There's been a great shift to digital. So my question then is, for eligibility, and also because there's usually a very massive information gap for startups, and when it comes to, you know, knowing what's going on, who can tap into this? Are you looking for, you know, particular sectors? Is it manufacturing? Is it just help us fully understand so that me as Ingrid, after I get off this show today, I just get onto my computer and I really know exactly what I'm doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So the platform, it's open to all entrepreneurs that are harnessing technology to address various challenges, irrespective of what sector they are, right? Because at least in our opinion, there are a lot of challenges on the continent, and all those challenges are important to solve, right? You might think agriculture is super important because most of the people are employed within agriculture, right? But once they harvest their farms, they need technology to sell it, right? And that makes e-commerce important, for example. But also they need to be able to monetize on this as well. So that makes fintech important as well. So for us, what we are looking at are technology companies, because this makes those businesses scalable, right? And irrespective of whatever sector they are, the platform are open to them, right? Then that's for the knowledge transfer. Then the other component is the access to capital, right? For startups to be able to launch fundraising campaigns on the platform, and for these campaigns to be available to diaspora investors, and they can choose to invest companies that they find interesting, right? For this value proposition, it will be available to startups irrespective of what sector they are in, but these startups have to be validated by our local partners. Because for us, it's also important to ensure quality in order for the platform to be sustainable.
And I'm so glad you've brought about the issue of, you know, validation just for accountability and just making sure, like, obviously the right people are benefiting from this. But then there's always, and also depending on who you talk to, who's in business, there's been a very big concern when you speak to startup owners, and again, when you speak to entrepreneurs, when it comes to policies in place, you know, government goodwill. As someone who's playing in this space, what would be your 2 cents on that? Even as you've come in to address a need and just make things easier, because we all know small businesses, startups are really the backbone when it comes to continents and driving economies. However, there's still a lot of concern about, you know, local governments on the continent when it comes to favorable policies, and also when it comes to the amount of goodwill and how much they want to put into facilitating startups. Is enough being done? Does more need to be done? What would be your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, I think definitely in terms of support systems and policies that encourages entrepreneurship, I think a lot has to be done on the continent in order to have a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem, right? But having said that, I think entrepreneurs themselves are quite innovative in finding ways around this and seeing opportunities out of some of these challenges, right? So whilst we wait and implore the governments across the continent to put in policies that are favorable to these startups, what we can do on our part is to see how we can work given the circumstances. And already these entrepreneurs are doing a lot of that. It's just on us, the diaspora, to come and support them in that process.
Now, Lamin, one of the big reasons I actually was very, very excited to have this conversation with you is because I know the Bantaba digital platform is actually one of 8 startups chosen by the prestigious Stockholm School of Economics Business Lab. Now, to someone else, though, it sounds so fancy, a lot of jargon. Just help us, what sort of fit is this for the Bantaba digital platform? What's the significance of this? And is this a vote of endorsement? Like, what does this mean? And is this something you're excited about even?
Yeah, so like you said, we ourselves are an early stage company and we are part of Stockholm School of Economics Business Lab, which is a very prestigious business ecosystem, startup ecosystem. It's one of the best incubators in the Nordics here, right? And just to put into context, this is the place where companies like Klarna, an e-commerce giant that's operating across Europe, but also in North America started, right? But also Voi, for example, which is a micro-mobility company that has grown very, very rapidly in the past 2 years. So being part of the Stockholm School of Economics Business Lab gave us access to a lot of resources that many other startups do not have, right? We have access to this very, very wide network of like-minded entrepreneurs that you can always find and pick up conversations with. And the good thing is whatever problem that you face in your venture, it's very likely that someone else has faced it before and they have come up with some kind of solution to address it, right? So having this access is very, very good. But also it comes with this brand that people are willing to listen out to you, right? When we started our pre-seed fundraising, it took us, I think, 3 weeks in order to get subscription of more than 200% of what we were looking for in the first place, right? So it gives you that ability to knock on doors and have people answer you. But also at the same time, they give you access to resources like coaches, mentors who are very, very well experienced in this domain, right? So we are very, very proud to be part of SSC Business Lab. I think it's a validation and kind of demonstration of interest in the problem that we are solving as well. Because in addition to SSC Business Lab, for example, Bantaba was a finalist in SIP competition that started with 250 startups in Sweden here and ended up with the top 10, and we were one of those companies in the top 10.
Now, in summation, before I even let you go, you mentioned something that's important, where because we all know the problems and challenges of startups are not limited to just access to finance. And I want you to help us shed a little more light on that. I mean, there's a problem with skills. It's beyond just, you know, access to funds, access to someone to, you know, inject some money in my business. So as the Bantaba digital platform, and, you know, as someone who's picked interest, I feel like this is going to be the solution to a lot of my problems, beyond being that link for me as a startup to investors, you know, African investors in the diaspora. What more? What's in terms of value? What can I look forward to from the app? And, you know, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So like you mentioned, the access to investment, it's super important for many startups, but it's not necessarily the only thing that you need to succeed as a startup, right? Once you have that investment, you need to be able to get access to talent that you need in order to grow the business, right? And that's where our knowledge transfer component comes into play, because you will be able to identify people who have the skills that you are looking for, right? But in addition to that, also we give startups access to networks that does not exist within their local ecosystems, right? So for example, they can network with their peer entrepreneurs in the diaspora company, like countries like myself, for example, right? And this could provide a learning opportunity for startups in Africa. But at the same time, they can even be connected with people who can look for the market opportunities in markets across their borders, for example.